Jason Collington, editor of the Tulsa World. I'm here this week with Andrea Eger. She's our projects reporter, and she's going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. Andrea, it's not every day that we send one of our reporters to D.C. and not every day that you send them to the U.S. Supreme Court. Tell us what's going to be happening this week.
So Oklahoma Catholic leaders are trying to get access to charter school funding in our state to open a private Catholic school that operates online and offers Catholic education, openly religious Catholic education to students all over the state. They want to do that, they say, because there are many rural parts of this state where there aren't Catholic parishes or parochial schools. And so they say they want to expand access to Catholic education. And our Attorney General in this state, Gentner Drummond, sued to stop that effort and won at the state Supreme Court level. And St. Isidore, the Catholic school proposal, the proponents behind that appealed to the Supreme Court, as did the state board that initially approved that school. And those appeals will be will be heard on Wednesday before the Supreme Court. There will be oral arguments. The Supreme Court justices will be able to ask questions of all of the many attorneys involved in this case, and a ruling is expected by June.
And there are really two issues here, and you've really written all of this and reported this out in two different stories that we have at TulsaWorld.com. You've got one case that, there's really two cases before the Supreme Court here. Explain which both of them.
Right. So one half of the case is the charter school proposal that the actual proponents, the Oklahoma Catholic leaders, are appealing to the Supreme Court. The other half of the case is the statewide charter school board that approved that school initially. And the Supreme Court consolidated those two cases into one. They will hear them both at the same time. And the two issues within that consolidated case are the separation of church and state issues here. This would be the first religious charter school in the country if the Supreme Court overturns the Oklahoma Supreme Court in this case. And the second main issue is the question of whether or not a charter school is what lawyers call a state actor, whether it's really a public school as defined in our state law and in federal law and regulation, or as St. Isidore contends, that it's a private entity. And if it is a private entity, the separation of church and state balancing act there, that has to be weighed out there, could favor St. Isidore in that, a private entity would have free exercise of religious rights at stake. If it is a public school, as our Attorney General contends and points to state law and federal law, then the question is whether or not a state-sanctioned public school could fund religious teaching.
And you talked to one of the foremost experts on when it comes to religious freedom in this past Sunday story, where he laid out there are some cases that have gone before the Supreme Court that this is building on. What kind of momentum was started with those other cases?
There were several examples between 2017 and 2022 in which the Supreme Court weighed on the side of free exercise rights in a way that the Supreme Court over the previous 7 decades had not. The previous courts had favored, a harder wall between church and state. And, over the course of 5 years leading up to 2022, the Supreme Court has ruled, in favor of religious entities being able to access government funding in various programs in different states. And has ruled saying that, religious entities can't be barred just on the grounds of their religious beliefs. And, one was a parking lot construction program
Right.
in Missouri. One was a case out of Maine, and the state opened up public school funding to private entities for kids that live in rural parts of that state that don't have easy access to a public high school. And so those cases are being pointed to by St. Isidore, by the lawyers that have assisted in their application. There's a religious freedom law clinic at Notre Dame that has assisted them, and a big, Christian Religious Freedom Law Institute called Alliance Defending Freedom that's assisting in that case and is trying to, push forward with religious entities being able to access taxpayer money for religious teaching. And that national expert that I interviewed for my most recent story said that would represent a sea change in this country and could, remake the way that charter schools are treated all over this country, and their ability to access funding within the current framework would likely have to change dramatically.
Well, just like many cases in front of the Supreme Court, if there's a decision made that's different than what's been precedent before, there's going to be dominoes. And I'll assure you that Andrea is going to be reporting on all those dominoes if anything happens. Again, you said this case is going to be heard this week, but a decision will be later this summer. We will have all of Andrea's coverage, not only of her in DC, but also the aftermath of any decision that's made at TulsaRule.com. Andrea, thanks for joining us.
You bet.